Hi guys, okay, so let's just clear something up. This will be a very brief video. Excalibur and the sword in the stone were originally the same sword, okay? They were not originally different swords that people today conflate. They were originally the same sword. The sword in the stone first appears in Robert de Boron's poem, Merlin, which we basically don't have today, but we have a prose version of it written shortly afterwards, possibly even by Robert himself, and in that the sword in the stone is not named, but it is said when Arthur becomes king, he specifically said to defend the nation with that sword. And given that all previous accounts have Arthur have this special sword, which is Excalibur, which is the old Welsh version of the name Excalibur, it logically follows that Robert de Boron was describing Excalibur, the sword with which Arthur defended the nation. Now, shortly afterwards, in 1215, we have the Vulgate cycle. Now, in that, the sword in the stone is explicitly presented as the same as Excalibur, the sword which Arthur uses throughout his reign. Then, shortly after that, we have the post-Vulgate cycle, in which they are different swords. Okay, so that's where we first see Excalibur and the sword in the stone distinguished as different swords. And then later, of course, you have Thomas Malory's famous Le Morte d'Arthur, in which, again, they are different swords. So that's the source for this famous idea that, oh, the sword in the stone and Excalibur were two different swords. We do see that as early as the post-Vulgate cycle, but it's really Le Morte d'Arthur which everyone is thinking of and talking about when they refer to the story of Arthur and Excalibur and the sword in the stone. However, even in Thomas Malory's version, the sword in the stone is actually called Excalibur as well. So both swords are called Excalibur, so it wouldn't really be incorrect to refer to the sword in the stone as Excalibur if you're referring to the famous version of Arthur's story, Le Morte d'Arthur. But here's another thing, okay, so some people say that the sword in the stone is Caliburn, and the sword that was given to Arthur from the Lady of the Lake is Excalibur. That is not true. There is absolutely no medieval source which distinguishes Caliburn from Excalibur. They are simply two different spellings and forms of the same name. The original Welsh form is Caladvoc, which I'm probably not pronouncing right, but there you have it on the screen. That is what Arthur's sword is called in the Welsh texts, and then in various Latin sources and other language sources, we find that word presented as variations of Caliburn or Caliburc, and other variations thereof, and then it becomes Excalibur. There is no source which distinguishes Caliburn as a separate thing from Excalibur. They are just different spellings of the same thing. It's the same sword. Okay, so in versions of the tale which refer to Caliburn, that's Excalibur, and vice versa. Stories that refer to Excalibur, that's the same as Caliburn. There's no distinction between them in the medieval sources. This idea that the sword in the stone was Caliburn, as distinct from the later Excalibur, is a complete and utter modern myth. Okay, there's no basis for it at all. So I just wanted to clear that up because I see lots of misinformation about the sword in the stone and Excalibur. So there we go. Hopefully that clears some things up.